Has anyone ever been in a situation like this before? So anyway, it all started last week. I live with 4 roommates: Jess, Lily, Dane, and Miguel. Lily is the one who I'm pretty sure is dead, even though my housemates all say she's pretending. And at first I did think she was pretending. It's an old trick of hers. She's super introverted, and sometimes if she's overwhelmed or just doesn't want to talk, she'll pretend to be asleep. We call it her playing possum. But now, she's been playing possum for nearly a week. Her eyes are open, her face is this grayish-white, and has been turning kind of purplish. Her body is bloating, and I saw a fly land on her eyeball, and I think it laid eggs there. She hasn't changed out of her panda onesie since she started playing possum last Monday. She smells like a corpse smells, like rotting meat, and that panda onesie, that panda suit is so gross. I'm pretty sure she died in it last Monday, and everyone is just in some kind of denial. But does that even make sense? I mean, how is it 3 other people are all saying she's alive and that I'm delusional? Is it just some bizarre social experiment? I keep waiting for some reality TV host to pop out from behind the potted plant and a hidden audience to start laughing or clapping. I feel like I'm coming unglued from reality. I'm sitting on the sofa as I write this, by the way. Sitting here looking across the TV room at Lily, who is propped up in the same chair she died in, eyes wide open, flesh bloated and lips purplish and skin just, I think she's going to start leaking into that chair. But let me rewind us to last Sunday. Sunday is when we hit the old lady's cat. It wasn't on purpose. We'd all had a bit too much to drink, and I was driving, and Dane was in the passenger seat, and Jess and Miguel and Lily were in the back, and the cat, it just freaking raced out into the road, solid black, and then there was a thump. My stomach flipped, and then this old woman came out of her house and saw her cat had been hit and screamed and screamed. Lily told her she should have kept her cat inside, not let it wander near a busy road. Anyway, long story short, I think that lady was a witch and hexed us for killing her cat. More specifically, I think she hexed Lily. I mean, I don't think, I know, because the woman said some words in a strange language, and we all called her crazy and drove home. So that was Sunday night. Come Monday, when I came out for breakfast, I was up early as usual. The only other person out in her chair in the living room was Lily, bundled up in her panda onesie. I said good morning, but she had a 1,000-yard stare. I figured she just wanted to be left alone, and didn't think anything more of it until I got home from work in the afternoon. Lily was still in the chair, same exact pose, still in her panda onesie. I asked if she was all right. Miguel was playing a video game, and he answered for her. Said Lily was sick and had stayed home from classes. I hope you feel better, I told Lily. She didn't respond. Lily, I said. She didn't respond. Hey, Lily, I said that I hope. Chill, just leave her alone, snapped Miguel, who seemed annoyed because I was interrupting his game. I thought it was weird, but I let it go because he was acting so normal. But at dinner, she was still in her chair, in the same pose, and hadn't moved. I tried talking to Jess, who told me, she'll be fine, it's just a cold. This behavior went on for days, and anytime I tried to ask any of my roommates if Lily was okay, they would act like I was the crazy one. I tried to point out she hadn't changed out of her onesie and was told to quit being an asshole. She's sick, let her be. At one point I was staring at her from the sofa, trying to catch her blinking, and Jess yelled at me and told me to stop being such a creep, that I was weirding Lily out. They even put up a big cushion in front of her to block her from having to see me, which she clearly couldn't because she was by this point 3 days dead. I assumed once the rotting set in that they would notice, but they just pretended all the harder. And in fact, they even started staging her body? Like, I know it sounds really weird. I don't know why they did it or if it's some sick social experiment or what, but they moved her. I found her at the table one morning. She was slumped backwards over her chair, sightless eyes staring up at the ceiling. Everyone talked to her like she was alive. By this point, she also stank. I mean, to the point I even noticed Miguel and Dane kind of surreptitiously keeping their distance and breathing through their mouths, not their noses around her. I tried to talk about this to them later, but Miguel just wrinkled his nose at me and said, yeah, I know, it's gross, but she's super depressed. Jess says she's never seen Lily this bad before. She's mad upset about that cat. Just let her be. We gotta let her work through this. She'll come out of it. Until then, things like showering and getting out of bed are really hard for her. I almost told him, yes, those things would be hard for a dead person to do, but I didn't. Honestly, I didn't know how to respond. I finally managed to say, dude, I think she's rotting in that panda suit. He chuckled and shook his head and said, come on, don't be an asshole. I finally did what I should have done from the beginning and called the police. I said I wanted a wellness check on Lily. My roommates tried to send them away, but I came downstairs and insisted and pointed to the corpse in the panda costume in the chair by the television. That chair was really gross by now, and the cops went over to examine her, and I really believed, really and truly, that we were all about to be arrested for having a dead girl rotting in our living room, congealing into that chair. But they pretended she was alive, the same as my roommates kept doing. She never spoke a word in answer to them, never moved. Later, Jess took me aside and told me my actions were uncalled for, and that all I did was make things worse for Lily. So now I'm not sure what to do. Update. It's been several more days since I wrote the above stuff, and as you can imagine, her body became severely decomposed. Also, I confronted my roommates. We got into a huge fight. I told them that clearly the witch's hex had done something to Lily, that it was blinding them, and we were all living with a dead girl. They looked shaken after I pointed out the smell. The way Lily wasn't eating, was literally rotting. They told me they thought I was seeing things, but the entire house reeked of death. None of us could stand it. We could all smell it. I heard Miguel and Dane whisper about the smell later, but they clamped up at a death glare from Jez. So I finally decided to take action. Last night, I bundled up the corpse in the panda suit and drove it out to the woods. There's these high bluffs out there. I tossed the corpse down the rocks. The animals out there will pick it to pieces, if it isn't already too rotted for them to eat. I came back home and also cleaned up around the house and put that disgusting chair out on the curb and finally went to bed. In the morning, I woke up to find Jess having a panic attack. She demanded to know where Lily was. I told her Lily left, and Jess accused me of lying. Miguel seemed relieved, though. While Jess went out in her car to go searching for Lily, Miguel told me he could finally breathe again, and that it really had smelled bad in here, and someone needed to do something. He said he hoped Lily got the help she needed, but that this wasn't the right place for her, and she probably needed inpatient treatment. I refrained from telling him that I thought it was way too late for a hospital. Anyway, her body being gone should be a good thing, except I think the hex is now hitting the rest of us. Because Dane, he's always a late sleeper. He didn't wake up through Jess's freakout or my conversation with Miguel, but now it's afternoon and I just came out and found him sitting next to Miguel on the sofa, playing video games. Only, he's not actually playing. His eyes stare straight ahead of him. His hands don't move. There's a first-person shooter on the screen, and Miguel keeps telling Dane he needs to step up his game, but Dane is literally doing nothing, seeing nothing. I think he's like Lily was last Monday. Like the hex hit him and now he's dead, but nobody can see it. I don't know if I should wait for his body to rot, or if I should just take him out to the bluff sooner. If this plays out the same way, Miguel won't stop pretending Dane is just fine. Jess will come home and also believe that he's still alive. Even the police will believe it. Why am I the one the hex didn't hit? Why am I the only one who can see that they're dead? Story 2. I paid $49.95 for revenge. Now I can't make it stop. It started with an ad. A stupid, bizarre ad that popped up as I was mindlessly scrolling one night. Get revenge on anyone for just $49.95 plus taxes. Results guaranteed. The image above it was weird. A grainy, low-resolution photo of a cake, lopsided and half-frosted, sitting in the middle of a dimly lit room. There were no candles, no decorations, just a single tiny knife stuck in the center, like someone had tried to cut a slice but given up halfway. Below it in bold red letters, "Start your 7-day plan today." I laughed. Then I clicked. I skimmed the fine print. Something about escalating consequences and a series of pranks over 7 days to the nominated victim. Finality of contract. One line caught my eye. Recipient must be personally known to the sender. This includes in-person acquaintances, direct online communication, or individuals whose written words the sender has read. Weird wording, but I barely paid attention. When I reached the section where I had to type in a name, I hesitated. It felt childish, but Megan was the obvious choice. Best friend since high school, more like best tormentor. She had spent years making sure I always felt less than. Every insult disguised as a joke, every eye roll when I spoke, every time she forgot to invite me somewhere, only to tell me later, "Oh, I just assumed you wouldn't want to come." Still, something about actually typing her name felt final, as if I somehow knew that once I did this, I couldn't go back. I clicked submit. Nothing happened. No confirmation email, no pop-ups, just silence. I rolled my eyes and went to bed, convinced I'd just wasted my money. The next day, Megan fell down a flight of stairs between classes. She broke her wrist and sprained her ankle. I overheard her telling our friend group that she swore someone pushed her, but there was no one there. At first, I laughed it off. Megan was always dramatic. But later, alone in my dorm, a strange unease crept in. I did this, didn't I? No, of course not. It was just a coincidence, right? The day after, Megan's car swerved off the road. She said the brakes wouldn't work. The mechanic found nothing wrong. Thankfully, she wasn't seriously hurt, but she was badly shaken. I couldn't shake the heavy, sinking feeling in my gut. This was exactly what the ad promised. By day 3, Megan showed up to class wearing long sleeves. In the middle of a lecture, she pushed them up absent-mindedly, and I saw it. Deep, jagged scratches covering her arms. I couldn't stop staring, like something had clawed her in her sleep. She caught me looking. "I don't know what's happening," she muttered. I think I might be losing my mind." Her voice was different, small, scared. I wanted to tell her I was sorry, but I wasn't sure who I'd be apologizing to, her or myself. Day 4. I passed by her dorm, and the door was open. People were gathered around, whispering. I peeked inside. Liar. Thief. The words were spray-painted across the walls, in jagged, erratic lines. Her roommate swore Megan hadn't left her bed all night. The door had been locked from the inside. Day 5. It was during class. Megan coughed, then choked, then vomited. Teeth. Not her own. Her mouth was still full, but these were yellowed, broken, crumbling, like they had been ripped from dozens of different people. She screamed. I nearly did too. That night, I sat awake, staring at my laptop, shaking. What the hell had I done? On the 6th day, Megan didn't come to class. When I finally saw her, she was hunched in the common room, rocking back and forth, eyes darting to things no one else could see. Her hair had turned white in patches. She smelled like something rotting. She didn't speak. I don't think she could anymore. Day 7. They found her in the dorm showers, curled in the corner, her mouth locked open in a silent scream. No one could explain how the water had been running hot enough to boil skin from bone. I couldn't breathe. This was my fault. I checked my bank statement, my stomach twisting. The charge from the website was still pending, but now it had a note next to it. Payment in progress. Please nominate the next recipient. I clicked the transaction. A web page loaded. You must nominate someone. 7 days will begin again. If no name is submitted, the cycle will revert to the original sender. I felt cold all over. No. I shut my laptop, my heart slamming against my ribs. But the next morning I woke up with a scratch across my stomach. Not just a scratch. Letters. Tick-tock. It was happening to me. I panicked. I had to pick someone. I wasn't ready to die. Megan wasn't the only one who had made my life hell. What about Olivia? She laughed at Megan's jokes. She made plenty of her own. I typed in Olivia's name. The cycle began again. I watched in horror as Olivia suffered. It started small, like Megan's had. A bad fall, weird scratches. Then it escalated. By day 5, she was pulling long strands of black hair from her throat, sobbing. By day 7, she was gone. But the cycle didn't stop. Another charge appeared on my account. Another demand. Next recipient required. I ran out of mean girls. Then I nominated a professor who humiliated me in front of the whole class. Then a barista who sneered at me when I fumbled my order. Then a roommate from high school. Each time the cycle restarted. Each time I had to watch as someone else unraveled. Teeth falling out, fingers bending backwards, rotting smells that clung to them even after they scrubbed their skin raw. Every death felt heavier. Every choice felt worse. And then I ran out of names. I stared at the empty box on the website. My hands shook. I knew what would happen if I didn't submit a name. The cycle would revert to me. I tried entering celebrities, strangers, politicians. It rejected them. The recipient must be personally known to the sender. This includes in-person acquaintances, direct online communication, or individuals whose written words the sender has read. My breath caught in my throat. There was no one left. And now it's day 6. I wake up covered in scratches, my reflection whispering things I don't understand. I feel something watching me from the corner of every room. The floorboards creak when no one is there. I know what's waiting for me tomorrow. I have 1 day left, and I have no one else to choose but you. Story 3. I work at a 24-hour pet ER, and we had a patient that wasn't an animal. The man walked in at 2 a.m., dragging something black behind him. The way it moved didn't sit right. Neither did he. The receptionist felt it immediately. It was the way he walked, stiff and uneven, like a scarecrow with one leg shorter than the other. He hid greasy blonde hair beneath a 10-gallon hat, spurs clicking as he moved. I watched the security footage later. His lips were white and thin, his teeth crooked, his mouth twisted into a half-smile, like he was seconds from laughter. He was dragging a massive black Rottweiler. The dog resisted, back paws sliding across the floor. The camera didn't pick up sound, but later, the two gals at reception told me what he said. "He's actin' possessed." They handed him intake forms. He hobbled back to a bench. I watched through the camera lens as another client holding a cat carrier slid away from him. I looked up his paperwork. The address led to some warehouse out in the scrublands, 3 states away. The name seemed fake, too. Keaton. No records. No online presence. It didn't seem to fit him. But the dog's name? Mutt. That was the only detail I believed. You might wonder why I checked. It's not standard protocol. I don't usually do this. But the events of the last few nights led me to my search. When he handed the paperwork back, he sat down again, dragging the dog with him like a sack of flour. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes fixed ahead. He moved like a corpse propped upright. His dog didn't move much either. It sat there, waiting. We see a lot of characters here, some aggressive, some kind. But this man, something about him was wrong in a way I can't articulate. I stepped into the lobby to bring him into an exam room. It took him a second to register me, like he was in a trance, and then the smell hit me. Stale cigarettes, gas fumes, and beneath that, something worse. A rotten, greasy stench that clung to the air. The dog sat still, vacant, a husk. It was like someone had lobotomized it. As it stood there, drool began dripping from its mouth, pooling on the floor. I introduced myself and got to work. "So, what's going on with Mutt today?" Keaton didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the ceiling, like he was staring at something that fluttered in the air above us. "Oh, he ain't actin' right. He ain't been eating much." This is usually where clients start rambling. Some could go on for hours if you let them. He had decided he'd given me enough information. He sat staring at the ceiling through those dirty locks of hair. When I knelt to take the dog's heart rate, the second my fingers touched its skin, a wrongness crawled into me. That tingle before lightning strikes. That creeping dread when something awful is about to happen. The vitals were normal, the heart rate, breathing, but its skin was cold, and its temperature was 97 degrees, lower than we like. I checked its skin, seeing how dehydrated it was, but when I peeled back its loose lips to check its gums, I felt a jolt of unease, like I was too close to something I shouldn't be. The gums were pale, the pupils locked onto me, dilated. That feeling of unease was sickening. "Don't turn your back on him," the man said. I paused mid-turn. "Excuse me? If you're going to walk from him, do it facin'. Otherwise, something bad might happen." I exhaled, irritated. He'd watched me get close to the dog, lean in, take its temperature, listen to its heart rate. Yet now was the time he decided to warn me it was aggressive? I liked this situation less and less. The man, the dog, the way this whole situation ached in my gut. I backed away, facing the dog. It watched me like I was prey, like I was meat. A few moments later, our on-site emergency veterinarian, Dr. Harcum, came in. Old school, no nonsense. He and Keaton exchanged few words. The vet recommended blood work and an overnight stay with an IV fluid drip. The dog needed warming up too. Keaton never lost that dumb smile, that half-cocked grin, like something was hilarious. But he nodded, accepted the treatment plan. We went to take the dog into the back treatment area. I slipped a muzzle on, of course, and that's when I noticed how the dog refused to walk. The owner had dragged it behind him earlier, but now it wasn't acting lethargic. I could see in its eyes it was choosing not to move. It was being obstinate. I had a larger male staff member, Ryan, carry the dog for me. As he picked it up, he glanced at me. We didn't exchange words, but I knew he felt it too. Not only the dog. The air itself seemed to hum with an unearthly feeling. When we went to draw blood from its jugular, it didn't even react. Ryan held the dog steady, hands firm on either side of its head, jaws up. The needle slipped in. The syringe filled. The blood felt lukewarm. It didn't feel like it had just been pumping through a live body. I ran it through the machines, and it confirmed mild dehydration, with some elevated lipase values indicating mild pancreatitis. We placed it in a heated kennel, tucked it under blankets, and hooked up the IV catheter. Keaton was gone, but relief was fleeting. Mutt remained, and with him came something unseen, a presence thick as fog, pressing in from all sides. That was 3 days ago. That night was quiet, rare for an emergency hospital. We had another dog kenneled 2 spaces down from the Rottweiler. It was a cattle dog that had undergone emergency laparotomy. It had been doing fine, normal vitals, good appetite, responsive. 2 hours later, I crossed into the back animal ward to check on it. The cattle dog was dead. It had torn open its own incision. The cone lay discarded. It hadn't just licked or nibbled. It had utterly and completely dismantled itself. Even when coils of intestine unfurled from its abdomen, it kept biting at those guts. The dog had attacked his own innards as if they were coiled vipers waiting to lunge. The dog was in a wet slump, head limp against the floor. The blood ran in bright ribbons, swirling toward the kennel drain behind him. I heard the gentle slurp of the blood sucking down the drain. The kennel was a bloodbath. It streaked the walls, spattered the ceiling. His intestines had leaked a mixture of bile and digested sludge. The cattle dog's eyes were vacant orbs, glistening in the light. I stood still for a moment, taking in the horror, the scope of this violence. And 2 kennels down sat Mutt, eyes focused on my task, no expression on his stoic face, fluid drip running, heater humming. There was only the sound of the blood in the pipes. Mutt didn't pant. He didn't whine. His eyes reflected the fluorescent light, and for one sickening second, they looked almost human. Dr. Harcum made the call, but I heard every word, every choked sob through the thin walls of our office. The owner didn't cry. They wailed. I'd seen plenty of death in this job, but this was different. This wasn't bad luck. Something else had its hands in this. The mood in the hospital shifted palpably. In all my years, I'd never seen a dog unzip itself like a gym bag and spill out its intestines. His eyes followed every movement, the bloody towels, the mop buckets, the cattle dog-sized body bag, zip-tied and labeled. That night was quiet, but it didn't feel like a break. I imagined I was in a field staring at thunderheads form, like warships in the distant sky. That feeling was the promise of something worse to come. At some point, hours after the cattle dog's death, I heard the steady beeping of a monitor from the kennel ward. It was the IV pump, hooked up to Mutt. I didn't want to go over there, but I did. I brought Ryan. We slipped the muzzle over Mutt's head. He didn't resist, didn't flinch. He let it happen. His eyes followed the movement of our hands as we buckled it behind his head. Only his eyes moved, 2 dark orbs. He was digesting the scene around him. It felt like he was learning and listening. The dog had kinked the IV line beneath its paw. We moved it aside, smoothed it out. That should have been it. A simple fix. But as we turned to leave, the light above his kennel flickered. At first we saw a slight flicker. It was barely noticeable. Then it sputtered, dimmed, and cut out completely. The kennel dropped into shadow. Ryan and I froze. The only light now was a faint glow from the hallway behind us. We exchanged a glance. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us wanted to acknowledge what we were feeling. The air in the room changed, heavy, buzzing, like the static before a storm. Then the 2 tube lights above Mutt's kennel flared so bright it hurt to look at them. A pop, then a sizzle, and they died. Everything was silent. Ryan's back was to Mutt. Mutt lunged. It was a surge of violence, even with the muzzle strapped tight, a blur of black as Mutt's body lunged forward. The muzzled face rammed against Ryan's side, smashing into him again and again. Ryan screamed. The dog was silent, except for the mechanical snapping of his jaws working beneath the muzzle, spittle flying. Ryan twisted, trying to stand, but the sudden attack had taken him off guard. I reacted without thinking, threw open the kennel door. Mutt rammed into Ryan again, harder this time. The sheer force knocked him off balance. Ryan writhed around to grab at Mutt. The moment he faced Mutt, the dog stilled. It stood there motionless, bathed in the new darkness. Something was wrong with this dog. Not neurologically, it was something so much deeper. I sensed the calculating intelligence of a predator, but it felt much more malignant than that, like a cancerous tumor spreading quietly beneath the surface of your skin. Ryan and I trembled, shaken to the core. Later he revealed a bruise under his ribs, a deep bloom of violet spreading like a rose beneath his skin. Neither of us spoke about it. The rest of the night passed without incident. I focused on my other cases for the night. I worked with a Chihuahua hacking through pneumonia, a Persian cat with seizures, and a tabby cat with proprioceptive issues in its forelimbs. I went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. Ryan seemed dazed, like something fresh had broken inside of him. It wasn't the shock, or the trauma, or the fear. It was more profound than that. I left for the night still unsettled. Ryan didn't even wave goodbye when I passed by. I chain-smoked cigarettes in my car before driving home, flicked the butts out the window, and watched them sail onto the asphalt. My hands were shaking the entire ride, and when I finally collapsed into bed, I pulled my pistol out of my purse and slipped it under my pillow. And as the sun crept over the horizon, my dreams were wrong. I dreamed of a black face snarling in the dark, leaning in, sniffing, eyes like hollow pits, endless swirling galaxies within. I felt the faraway sting of teeth sinking into my flesh. Not a bite, not an attack, but a slow, deliberate pressure, easing into my skin. When I woke, my sheets were damp with sweat. When I came in for my shift that night, I felt a deep sense of disappointment the second I walked past Mutt's kennel. He was still there, heater purring, eyes following. The lights above his kennel were still blown out. The ones beside them had started to flicker. Ryan called out sick, said he'd been throwing up since the night before. I had a feeling there was more to the story, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I shot him a text wishing him well. He read it, yet he didn't reply. And that sinister, eerie man who called himself Keaton? His phone went straight to dial tone when we tried calling for a case update. He wasn't coming back. He'd paid half his bill up front in crisp, old $100 bills. We weren't getting the other half. The night was busier. I told my manager we shouldn't put any other dogs in that ward, but we didn't have a choice. Our small animal ward was on the other side of the building, but for the larger dogs, they had to go there. We admitted a Great Dane with liver disease. There was nowhere else to put him, so I placed him in the kennel farthest from Mutt, 2 down from the cattle dog that had ripped itself apart. When I went back to check on them 10 minutes later, I stopped cold. Mutt's kennel was wide open. The latch was undone. The door swung open. He wasn't on fluids anymore. Someone must have taken him off. There was no beeping fluid pump, and there was no sign of how the door had opened by itself. This part of the facility was desolate this time of night. Mutt was sitting right at the threshold, slack-jawed and unblinking. I shut the kennel, latched it, and then I left the room. I returned with 2 plates of food. Immediately I felt nauseous. The kennel was wide open again. I hadn't heard a sound, hadn't seen the door move. The only way to unlatch these kennels is with hands, with opposable thumbs. I was certain no one had been back here while I grabbed the cans of food. I slammed it shut again, this time locking it with a makeshift carabiner clip. I slid 1 plate of food under each kennel. I gave low-fat wet food for the Dane and critical care wet food for Mutt. I was walking away when I heard it, a sound that froze me. Not a growl, not a whine. It sounded like someone trying to speak while gargling a mouthful of water, like a deep male voice gargling on words before spitting them out. It was the sound of a dog trying to talk. I turned. Mutt sat there, silent now. Something tingled in the air, a musical conductor guiding along an orchestra, because to my right, the Dane had begun to cry. The Dane was the one making these ungodly noises. The Dane's plate of food lay spilled across the kennel floor, his hackles folded back. The Dane backpedaled until its body pressed against the far wall. I watched the Dane's gaze flicker up toward the ceiling. It became immediately apparent to me that the dog was feeling something, a deeply instinctual and inexplicable something. I knew it was feeling that way, because I felt it too. When I reached for the kennel door, the crying stopped. The Dane's body trembled. Then his whimpering changed. It deepened into a low, eerie sound, like a tornado siren, changing in pitch and tone, high to low. Without warning, it stopped altogether. The dog went still, too still, gathering itself back to a normal pose. Then, all at once, the Dane began attacking his own leg, not chewing, not licking, ripping, breaking. These were deep, pulverizing bites. Bone audibly cracked in the echo of the cavernous hallway. Blood spattered the kennel floor. It wasn't a dog in pain. It wasn't a dog in distress. It was something else. This dog was destroying itself with purpose. I couldn't go in there. If I did, he'd likely redirect this aggression onto me. He would send me to the hospital if I tried to intervene. I turned and ran, shouting for help as I sprinted through the clinic. Dr. Harcum and 2 other techs, Angie and Denise, came rushing out of an exam room, the hallway filling with the sound of my frantic screaming. I grabbed a rabies catch pole and beat them back to the kennels. The Dane was still biting, not a rabid and frothing frenzy, but instead an oddly calm and intentional one. The flesh of its leg hung in shredded tatters, tendon and the suggestion of bone beneath. Blood spurted like pulsing shots from a water gun in rhythm with its heartbeats. I slipped open the kennel door and looped the catch pole around its neck, tightening it hard. In a wrenching movement, I maneuvered its head enough to stop it from lunging at its own body. It snapped at the air, frantic, without even a hint of pain or emotion behind it. Then it latched onto the metal pole, not out of panic, not out of rage, out of a bizarre corruption of instinct. The sound was unbearable, teeth breaking against metal, splintering, shattering. The flesh of its leg was gone, a ragged mess of meat exposed to the air that flapped as it chewed at the metal. I saw part of a fractured canine fall out of its mouth. The catch pole was bloody, dented but holding firm, withstanding each powerful bite directed at it. The dog was weakening by the time Dr. Harkham arrived, slumping over in the drenched puddle of its own blood. By the time we managed to inject a sedative, it was too late. The blood loss was too severe. The Dane collapsed to the floor, body twitching, biting at the air. It wound down like a toy with dying batteries, its eyes glazing over before going limp. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mutt, lips pulled back in a snarl. "When is that fucking dog going to leave?" I snapped, pointing at him. Dr. Harkham shot me a sharp look. Blood streaked his white coat. His eyes were dark, hollowed with an exhaustion brought on long before Mutt entered our lives. "Something is wrong with it," I insisted, "with him. All I see is a dog who mutilated itself in our care and then bled out. Mind you, this is the second one in 2 days. Don't worry about that fucking dog." He gestured at Mutt emphatically. "We have bigger issues here. I have another owner to call, another person I have to tell their pet killed itself, under my watch. God, this is a mess." He flicked blood from his fingers, dragged a sleeve across his face. He was years past burnout, a shell of his former self. He couldn't see what I saw. He couldn't see the way Mutt watched, the way his eyes lingered over the carnage pooling beneath my feet, like he was enjoying it. Dr. Harkham sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. "We tried calling that creepy bastard again. Numbers out of service. He ditched the dog on us. That meant we had to rehome it. It could take weeks. I couldn't take weeks with him. None of us could." And as I looked into Angie's eyes, I knew she felt the same. And over the next few hours, the hospital settled into an uneasy silence. The night shift pressed on, but something had shifted. We were all exhausted, hollowed out by what we'd seen. The cattle dog, the Great Dane, the blood, the 2 blood-drenched kennels we'd had to clean up. Mutt still sat in his kennel, untouched food sitting at his feet. The heater hummed in background. 2 more lights flickered out while I cleaned. I mopped blood from the floors, the thick iron scent clinging to my skin. The mess soaking the towels we used was a deep, ugly red. And through it all, Mutt never looked away from us, a shadow looming in the dark part of this corridor. I told myself I'd figure something out, that I needed time. But time wasn't on my side. I was dumping a load of bloody towels into the laundry bin when I heard it. "Elizen." I dropped everything. A voice, thick and wet, slurred in a way no dog's throat was built to produce. It wasn't a bark, it wasn't a growl, it was trying to speak. And what came out wasn't a sound, it was a name, my name, Allison. I turned, stomach lurching. Mutt was sitting in his kennel, still, muzzle slack, drool pooling on the blanket beneath him. His pupils seemed to swallow all the remaining light. I couldn't move. My brain was trying to rationalize it, trying to shove what I had heard into a box of normalcy. Maybe I'd misheard it. Maybe it was the pipes, or a monitor. Then the stench of rot hit my nose like a sniff of smelling salts. It was not the usual smell of the hospital, not the faint antiseptic and animal musk that always clung to the air. This was meat left in the sink for weeks. This was something dead wedged into the unseen cracks of the world. It was a volatile and overpowering scent, consuming anything else in the room. And I realized then that the smell I'd caught when Keaton first walked into the lobby, that greasy, putrid stench, it hadn't been him. It had been Mutt all along. I felt a desire deep in my core to run, and so I did. I scooped up the blankets off the floor, shoved them into the laundry bin, and bolted. My hands shook as I crammed the lid shut. My pulse was a hammer in my ears. Don't turn your back on it. The memory of Keaton's words crawled down my spine like a cold hand. He's actin' possessed. I knew what Mutt had tried to do to Ryan. I knew what he wanted to do to me. And now I knew I wasn't waiting for him to act. I was going to kill him. I kept my head down the rest of the shift, biding my time. My mind wasn't on the cases I took. I worked on autopilot. I went through the motions, but my body was moving without me. And when I got a moment alone, I pulled up 20 milliliters of pentobarbital sodium and phenytoin sodium solution. It's a medication called Euthasol. In other words, It's that sparkling pink liquid we, in the veterinary field, use to put animals down. I drew up enough of the stuff to kill a dog twice Mutt's size. There'd be a discrepancy in the controlled substance log, but I could smooth it out over the next few weeks. A couple of slightly higher doses given on euthanasia cases. If I logged these with enough time between them, I was confident no one would notice. I locked the cabinet, slid the syringe into my pants pocket. By doing this, I was committing a crime, breaking DEA laws. I could lose my license, my career, even end up in jail. But deep in my bones, I knew one thing for certain. That thing in the kennel, whatever it was, it needed to die. The next morning when I arrived for my shift, the hospital was heavy with grief. Everyone was crying, because it turned out Ryan was dead. He'd taken his own life in his trailer sometime after leaving work. No details, no explanation. He was there one day, then he was gone the next. The police had come by to inform us. They didn't stay long, didn't need to. I knew then. Ryan's death cemented what I had to do in my mind. I couldn't wait until another dog was placed in those kennels, until another staff member was pushed over the edge. So I worked through the grief, through the horror, pushing it all into a place I'd deal with later. I waited for the right moment, a lull between shift changes, when staffing was light. I approached Mutt's kennel. He cocked his head, his eyes tracking my movements. He looked almost expectant. I opened the kennel door and slid the muzzle over his face. My hands moved with a sharpness I hadn't felt before. I yanked the straps too tight, a bit of malice in my actions. My pulse was steady. I held Mutt's paw, feeling for the vein, my other hand already slipping the needle beneath the skin. The syringe in my palm felt hot. I pushed the plunger, forcing the thick, pink liquid into his vein. It was a heavy dose, too much for even the largest dog, but I pushed every last drop. Normally, euthanasia is instant. A body slumps, the muscles relax, and life fades like a deep exhale. Their eyes stay open, but they flood with vacancy. Mutt didn't move. His chest still rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. His muscles remained locked, rigid. His pupils, wide and black, never left mine. This dose should have ended him. This dog should be dead. The hallway lights flickered. One by one, the bulbs sizzled out, plunging the kennel ward into a profound darkness. The air thickened, heavy with the weight of something unseen. The heater shuddered to a stop. The only glow now came from the exit sign at the far end of the hall, casting a weak green wash over the kennels. The shadows seemed to twist and dance around me. I felt adhered to the spot, unable to move. The door to the kennel slammed shut behind me. My breath hitched. The silence was absolute now, only interspersed with the slow, wet rasp of Mutt's breathing. I could feel him in the dark, the weight of his presence gnawing at the air. Alison. The voice came from before me, deep into the churning pool of shadows, further back into the kennel. A sound like vocal cords cut like strings and hidden beneath a mound of scar tissue. A broken, misshapen mouth trying to shape words. The vowels stretched, dripping with something slick and inhuman. My stomach lurched. I reached for the latch, fingers fumbling, but my hands were slick with sweat. My breathing was too loud. The darkness pressed in. The rot smell thickened, crawling up my throat. Then I felt it. A cold, dead hand closed around my ankle. I choked on a scream. My body jolted as something gripped me. Those jagged fingernails pressed against the fabric of my scrub pants. The air rippled in an electric wash. The sensation of static snapped against my skin. I turned in a single heaving motion and I ran. The kennel door gave way beneath my shoulder, and I burst into the hallway, feet pounding against the tile. Behind me I heard the kennel door smash open, the sound of paws, heavy and fast, hitting the ground. He was coming. I sprinted blindly through the dark, running my fingers along the wall as I searched for the end of the hallway. When I reached it, my fingers scraped against the smooth wood. For a time, completely unable to find a knob, a latch, my fingers graced only an endless surface. Paws pounded closer behind me. I swear I heard more than one set of them. It almost sounded like a quiet herd. There was no growling, no snarling, no warning, just the rush of movement in the dark. A silent freight train, barreling toward me. So I spun, pressing my back against the door. The darkness beyond was absolute, thick and suffocating. The emergency exit sign glowed faint above me, swallowing the building in a weak neon glow. The slap of paws on tile stopped, and I saw the faint outline of a hunched beast. A panther crouched behind brush, seeking out its prey. Breathing filled the void, slow, wet, and thick with malice. Then, a whisper of movement, so close I felt the air shift around my face. I turned and bolted down the hall. Instinct drove me forwards, without thought or plan. My body simply moved on its own accord. I reached my locker, yanked it open, hands scrambling for my purse. The air shifted. A weight pressed close. I felt it before I saw it. A swirling black hole, yawning open behind me. My fingers closed around cold metal, the grip of my handgun. I turned and I raised the barrel towards the faint figure I could make out in the darkness, and I fired. The first shot lit up the hall like a camera flash. In that brief flicker I saw him, that snarling grin. The second shot, the third. His body jerked, but he didn't fall. My ears buzzed with each concussive shot. In the green shimmer of the exit sign, I saw that his lips were still curled back in that awful rictus. The sixth and final shot hit its mark. The left side of his skull caved inward, the muzzle of his face blown apart where the bullet had exited. Even in the thin light, I saw how his jaw sagged open, how that tongue flopped out limp, and even as he fell, his head twitched. A violent, unnatural snap of movement. A thick, wet pop echoed. He swayed. Then finally he collapsed in a heap all at once. I stood there, gun trembling in my hands, ears ringing. The darkness still pulsed around me, thick and heavy, pressing in from all sides. Then footsteps, shouts, voices. Someone grabbed my arm, yanking me back. The lights flickered, buzzed, then flared back to life, and for the first time, I saw what I had done. One shot had buried itself in the tile. The rest had hit him. Mutt lay on his side, his head a ruin of blood and bone. His chest rose once, twice. Then he went still. The bite muzzle was missing. He must have pulled it off somewhere during the chase. I didn't move. The hospital swarmed with police. I don't know who called them or when, but they arrived fast. A slew of questions. I registered almost nothing in my haze. They took me into the back office, my hands still shaking, my ears still filled with phantom echoes. I knew exactly what I had to say. I knew how to frame it. Self-defense. My Uncle Philip was a defense attorney. He talked shop often with me on our fishing trip outings together, so I knew a little more than I let on, and I managed to play my part well. And so, the police let me go. We wrapped, bagged, and stuffed Mutt in the freezer, awaiting cremation. And I took time off work, spent a few days in silence, trying to erase the memory of that voice, tried to ignore that palpable sound of my name in some twisted, malformed mouth. As you likely imagined, it didn't work. The phone rang on the morning of my scheduled return to work. It was a blocked number. Part of me knew the call was coming, as irrational as that sounds, and so I answered. Slow, shaky breathing filled the line. Then he began to laugh, like everything that had happened to me was a hilarious joke. Low, drawling, thick with something I couldn't name. Maybe it was a mouthful of tobacco chew. You shouldn't have killed it, little lady. Keaton. His voice slithered through the speaker, curling like a snake around my spine. His laughter built, rising, filling the silence. You've gone and made things so much worse. And as the laughing turned into hollering, the line clicked dead. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, staring up at nothing, his words weighing down the air. Gone and made things so much worse. My first thought was confusion. How did he get my number? My second thought was frantic. Those words struck a chord deep inside my marrow. He said I'd made things worse, and for some reason, deep in the pit of my soul, I believed him. Part 2. It started with a dog, or rather, something wearing a dog's skin. I thought I was doing the right thing when I put it down, but now something far worse is stalking me. Had to clean up a few things first. The worst of it was the euthisol I used on Mutt. On my first day back, I staged an accident. I dropped the bottle and let it shatter across the floor. It complicated the logs, but it worked. I'm not proud of it. You shouldn't be either. But at the time, it felt like the only option. I was wrong. My first day back after a hiatus at home, I noticed that Mutt was still in the freezer. His frozen paws had torn through the tough plastic bag, carving grooves into the ice crystals, growing like miniature spears along the inside of our freezer. I didn't tell anyone his body had moved. That sick feeling rose in my chest again as I stuffed him into 3 more layers of bags. If you aren't familiar with the bags we in the veterinary field use after pets pass away, they're made from high-density polyethylene or polyvinyl chloride. They're tough, thicker than sin. It's uncommon for paws to break through the plastic, but Mutt was never ordinary. I think it was a final fuck you. And well, right back at you, Mutt. Since Keaton wasn't picking up the tab, I offered to cover the cremation costs. I wanted those ashes in an urn, For some reason that felt important, something bigger than myself, something I couldn't explain. I didn't feel relieved when they hauled Mutt's body bag away, with the 2 other dogs I'm convinced died because of him. I kept hearing Keaton's words ringing in my ears. "You've gone and made things so much worse," his southern molasses drawl, mocking, laughing, a sick bastard. The clinic seemed to calm down at first, at least for a couple of days. I began to relax. Angie, my co-worker and friend, approached me. "Did you hear how Ryan did it?" I shook my head, quieter than usual, trying to show her I wasn't interested. Part of me blames myself for his death. I know how irrational it sounds, but the human mind is a sinister thing. Grief doesn't care about logic. It only cares about consuming, taking, destroying. She continued, "He stabbed himself with a letter opener. My cousin works as a highway patrol officer. He got all the details on it. It's horrible, Allison. He stabbed himself so many times. Please stop. I can't." The tears were already welling in my eyes. She reached out a hand to comfort me, but I brushed past it and locked myself in the bathroom. I spent 10 minutes gripping the sink, struggling to steady my breathing. The rest of the shift passed without incident. It was monotonous and calmer than it had been since I shot Mutt in the hallway. Angie was working a back-to-back double that night, something that had unfortunately become more common in recent years, as our clinic struggled with chronic understaffing. They asked if I could cover another shift too, but I said no. After everything I'd seen, everything I'd done, there weren't enough sane pieces of me left to give. That night, I settled into bed, my gun tucked under my pillow. The trailer was quiet, just the sound of wind outside, a high-pitched whooshing that rattled the walls every so often. But I found it almost soothing. As I lay there, closing my eyes, I saw it. A snarling, statuesque black Rottweiler, eyes like 2 bottomless pits. He moved through the trailer toward me, his presence a creeping weight in the dark. Then I looked down. Instead of paws, he had 4 pale hands, their flesh blending seamlessly into the black fur of his limbs. He strode forward. I couldn't move. Every muscle in my body locked up, frozen in place as he slunk beneath the foot of my bed. I tried to open my eyes, to wake up from the nightmare, but they were open, and I wasn't sleeping. A hand rose over the mattress edge. Another followed. I felt the weight of them, pressed down, the mattress sinking beneath an unseen force. It felt so real, too real. Then the snout emerged, slow and deliberate, rising above the sheets like a shark breaking the surface of the ocean. It drained the room of anything good, anything right. Only the ache of loneliness remained, a gnawing darkness spreading through me. I felt like I was sinking into a bottomless pit, falling endlessly. The stench of rotten meat filled my nostrils. The grinning maw loomed inches from my lips. Eyes burned into mine, wide and unblinking. A string of drool pressed against the skin of my neck. The mouth began to open, yawning. Each serrated edge gleamed in the moonlight, lining the jaws in jagged overlapping rows. The clicking of bone filled the silence as the jaw pried open past natural limits, tendons slipping and joints straining. It kept widening, the gaping maw stretching farther than anything human or animal should be able to. Hot, damp breath washed over my face, my teeth clenched. The mouth inched forward, slow and deliberate, savoring the moment. Every nerve in my body screamed to move, to fight, but I was frozen, paralyzed beneath the weight of its presence. The gaping maw hovered inches above my face, the serrated edges of its jaws twitching in anticipation. I could see the glistening sinew stretching as the jaws prepared to snap shut, feeling the unbearable heat of its breath seeping into my skin. A low, guttural growl rumbled from deep within its throat, vibrating through the mattress, through me. My pulse pounded against my temples, drowning out everything but the sound of that grinding, clicking jaw. Then my phone rang. The sudden chime shattered the moment, a blinding flash of light flooding the room. The weight lifted in an instant. The monstrous shape dissolved like mist, vanishing into the shadows as if it had never been there. I was moving before I realized it, gasping for air, clutching my chest, my heart hammered within me like the hooves of a warhorse, my limbs trembling as I scrambled upright, searching the darkness for any lingering sign that it had truly gone. Had I experienced sleep paralysis? Something worse? I heard my trailer door slam shut. I picked up the phone and flicked on the lamp by my bed. I heard a loud wailing siren and the sound of wind on the other line. My eyes were too blurry with tears to read the contact name. "Oh, Allison, fuck. Check the news." It was Dr. Harcum. He sounded out of breath. I grabbed my remote and flicked on the television and thumbed it to a local news station. Dr. Harkham breathed heavy in the background. "We are here on the scene of what is now suspected to be an incident of arson. Firefighters struggled to put out the blaze, although they stopped it from spreading to nearby buildings." I felt the world glaze over. I watched a team of yellow-clad firefighters picking through the cinders of my old workplace. God, half the roof was slumped in. The place was licked with flames. I recognized little pieces of a much larger puzzle, smashed and burned. I still clutched the phone to my head as I watched the firefighters pick through the ruins of an intimate part of my life. It was gone, just like Ryan. Angie, she didn't make it out. Dr. Harkham choked out a sob. A man who I'd worked with for years and had never seen shed a tear before began sobbing on the other line. This was a 60-something ranching vet who didn't take shit from anyone, a man carved out of the New Mexico dirt, tougher than the rest of us, and he was crying. I steeled myself, choking back my tears. Angie had been a friend, closer than Ryan. She'd burned to death in that building. "What happened? Tell me everything," I said, forcing down the swell of emotion. "I think it was that creepy bastard, that blonde motherfucker Keaton. We were working the shift when a container of gasoline with a lit rag was tossed through the back window into the doctor's office. It engulfed the place in flames in seconds. We lost some patients, too." His voice wavered, struggling to stay steady. "I don't know who would do that. Why? What did we ever do to that inbred piece of shit? So senseless. God, I told the police everything. This was beyond them, beyond what the police could understand. I'd sound insane if I told them everything. Even after I'd blown Mutt's jaw apart, I had omitted so much from my statement. Keaton didn't need a motive. He felt like it was ancient, a force of chaos that existed only to sow pain and reap a harvest of blood. He didn't need a reason, Doc, not to drop off that monster, not to burn down our clinic. He wanted us to suffer. He wanted to watch us die." Dr. Harkham was silent for a moment, my words hitting him like a blow. "I have to go," he finally said. "The police need a more detailed statement. Be safe, Allison." The line went dead. Another victim, Angie gone. Another life swallowed by the plague of tragedy I couldn't begin to understand. My hand trembled, not only from the horror of what I'd experienced, but from the weight of everything I'd lost, from the thought of Ryan's brutal self-destruction. Some creeping apocalypse had wandered into my life, and it was clear now it intended to stay. I couldn't sleep again. I didn't even try. My phone buzzed with texts from friends, family. One missed call stood out. My old friend Joe, Navajo Joe we used to call him, always with a grin. He'd just laugh, that handsome, tough son of a bitch. I should have called them all back immediately, but I had other, more pressing things to do first. I gathered my belongings, flipped open the cylinder of my revolver, and loaded a cartridge into each chamber. The compact 9mm felt solid in my grip, its matte finish worn smooth from years of use. Despite its small frame, the steel carried weight, reassuring and steady. I tossed a couple of ammo boxes into my purse, the rounds light but lethal, their copper-jacketed tips catching the dim glow of my bedside lamp. From the top of my cabinets, I pulled down an old wooden cigar box. Inside was a couple $1,000s I'd stashed away for emergencies. If this wasn't an emergency, I didn't know what was. I sat on the porch of my trailer, a cigarette pinched between my fingers, watching the sun claw its way over the horizon. Smoke curled into the air, twisting in the breeze, vanishing into nothing. By the time morning fully arrived, I'd burned through the whole pack. I checked my watch. The crematorium would be opening soon. They'd taken Mutt's body a couple of days ago. I needed to convince them to put Mutt at the top of the cremation list. My old Buick truck started with a low rumble, the engine purring to life, a gift from my late father. It had been his pride and joy. I reached up to adjust the rearview mirror and froze. A spiked black collar hung from it, tags jingling softly as I brushed against them. Mutt, and below it, Keaton's number. I recognized it immediately, the same one we tried calling at the clinic when he abandoned that thing on us. Not a dog, a thing. Where my fingers touched the collar, a biting chill crackled against my skin, like dry ice burning on contact. I rolled down the window and flung it into the scrub brush. It didn't make me feel any better. He had gotten it back. I'd placed it in the cremation bag with Mutt, but somehow it was here, which meant he'd been here, inside my car, inside my home. Maybe that thing in my trailer hadn't been Mutt at all. Maybe it had been Keaton. Mutt was just the beginning, and this was spiraling into a situation I couldn't contain, at least not alone. I pulled out of my small patch of land, kicking up a flurry of red dust. My air conditioner hummed. My fingers drummed against the steering wheel. 30 minutes later, I pulled up to the animal crematorium. a sunken gray cement building casting a wide shadow in the heat haze. I stepped out and tried the door handles. Locked. I pressed the doorbell and heard a faint jingle inside, but the lights were off. I checked my phone and swore under my breath. I'd been so lost in my own thoughts, I'd completely forgotten it was a federal holiday. No one was inside. Veterinary clinics contract with crematoriums, sending euthanized pets in sealed black bags. We store them in freezers until the company's van arrives to collect them. They're packed alongside animals from other clinics, then stored in even larger freezers at the crematorium until it's their turn for processing. It can take weeks to complete a cremation, but Mutt had only been here for a few days, and somehow I could feel him inside the building, like I was standing too close to a live wire. The offshoot road I'd followed was empty. In the distance, I could see the glimmer of traffic, but it was far enough away that no one would witness what I was about to do. I circled the building, checking for an alarm system. Nothing. Peering through the windows, I scanned the interior. No cameras either. Crematoriums aren't exactly prime targets for thieves. Nothing to protect except frozen animal corpses. At the back, I found a window. Above me, only miles of empty blue sky, the air still except for a faint breeze curling through the scrub. I crouched and picked up a stone the size of my palm from its resting place beside a cactus, weighing it in my hand. Then I hurled it through the glass. The window shattered unevenly, jagged shards left clinging to the frame like teeth. I found a stick nearby and used it to knock away the worst of them before pulling myself up and climbing through. Glass crunched beneath my boots as I landed inside. The rock I'd thrown had skittered across the floor, coming to rest far across the room. The space before me stretched out like a cavernous warehouse. To my left, 4 massive crematorium units, metal doors dull in the dim light. To my right, an entire wall of freezer units stood silent and still. Steel girders loomed overhead, casting long, skeletal shadows against the walls. It felt like I had walked into a place I wasn't meant to be, like intruding in a place that had been waiting for me. The silence wrapped around me, thick and uncertain. My heartbeat thumped against my ribs, steady but insistent, like a distant war drum. Behind me, the wind whistled through the broken window. Then the smell hit me. The thick, sickly stench of rot, like a corpse left too long in the sun, its hollowed skin splitting open, brimming with writhing black flies. The air crackled with the sound of unseen maggots popping and shifting. A sudden thump made me jerk toward the freezers. One of the lids lifted, then fell with a hollow clunk. I watched, my breath caught in my throat, as the white top rose and dropped again, like a mouth opening and closing. Then another freezer began knocking against itself, and another. Then they all started. The sound grew into a chaotic, discordant symphony. The freezers shuddered, vibrating against the floor, scraping and twisting from their original positions. Then all at once, the room fell still. Silence dawned. Then, with a deafening crash, the first freezer that had started thumping was hurled 10 feet across the floor. It flipped onto its side, metal screeching as it scraped across the concrete, body bags spilling from the burst seam. It slammed into one of the crematorium units, the impact tearing the freezer door clean off. The lid skidded across the floor, crashing into the wall with a metallic clang, and in the middle of the wreckage lay the triple-bagged corpse I recognized all too well, Mutt. His body was rigid, frozen stiff inside the thick layers of plastic. The paws pressed outward, twitching. I heard bones grinding, joints twisting, the sickening sound of something forcing itself to move when it shouldn't. The stiff limbs pushed against the plastic like a baby kicking from inside the womb. I felt eyes on me, burning pupils watching from behind. Shadows stretched and shifted in my periphery, but I couldn't take my gaze off the thing in front of me. The dog I had shot, the one with the caved-in skull, the one I had pumped full of euthanasia solution, the one that had been locked in a freezer for days. I spotted a square-point shovel leaning against one of the cremation units, caked in ash. I grabbed it, feeling the rough handle bite into my palm, and charged forward. I swung it down with all the force I could muster. The first strike split the thick plastic, sending frozen chunks of flesh spraying across the floor. Mutt's ruined head tumbled free. His frost-glazed eyes caught the dim light, and his shattered lower jaw smacked against the concrete, twitching. It was too frozen to bite, too stiff to do anything but thrash in mindless, spasmodic movements. My pulse thundered in my ears. The wind outside howled through the broken window, its pitch rising into something shrill, almost human. The shadows behind me deepened. I swung again. The shovel blade carved through tendons, severing the spine at the neck. The paws inside the torn body bag spasmed, clawing at nothing. I kept going, hacking away at the frozen flesh until the head detached completely with a final, sickening crunch. The wind howled louder, but I could sense that it wasn't only the wind behind me anymore. I turned. Keaton. He loomed in the broken window, impossibly tall, his body twisted to fit through the jagged frame. One hand gripped the windowsill, fingers digging into the crumbling concrete, the other obscured in the shadows. His filthy blonde hair hung limp over a face that wasn't quite human. His neck stretched forward, grotesquely elongated, the vertebrae bulging beneath thin, sallow skin. It didn't just extend, it coiled, folding over itself like an accordion, fluid yet wrong in every conceivable way. The angle of it made my stomach twist. His eyes were red, raw, pools of blood where the whites should have been, and they pinned me in place. The pupils were black, dull, the color of tarnished coins left to rot in the dirt. He inhaled, slow and deep, dragging in the air like he was tasting it, and then his lips split apart, curling into a grin that stretched too wide, splitting cheek to cheek as if his skin could barely contain it. His chest heaved, a silent laugh rippling through him, and his head, God, his head, was so much closer than it should have been. His clicking, sinuous neck had stretched impossibly far into the room, casting a long, warped shadow that swallowed the space between us. Mutt's body writhed behind me, flopping against the concrete like a fish without a head. The sickening smacks echoed through the cavernous room, each one more desperate, more wrong. I backed away from Keaton, slow and deliberate, my pulse hammering in my ears. He didn't speak, he just breathed, deep and slow, savoring the moment, drinking in my fear like it was red wine. The wind whispered through the broken window, stirring the air between us. Then his other arm rose, unnatural in its movement, the elbow joint clicking as it bent at a disturbing angle. His hand curled around something, lifting it up like a prize. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. A dark, matted thing, limp and swaying slightly. Then I saw how his fingers had sunk into it. His middle and ring fingers were buried deep in gaping eye sockets. His thumbs screwed into the crown of the head like he was gripping a bowling ball. The realization hit me like the blare of a car horn on a pitch-black road. A head. A human fucking head. The jaw hung slack, twisting from side to side with every minute shift of Keaton's grip. Blood clung to the torn skin in slick, wet strands. I knew that face. Dr. Harkham. The breath hitched in my throat, and I staggered back without thinking. A mistake. White-hot pain seared through my calf. A vice clamped down on my leg. My brain scrambled to catch up with what had just happened. I looked down. Mutt's severed head clamped onto my ankle, his mangled jaw locking in place. Torn flesh barely held the structure together, but the grip was unrelenting, teeth buried deep. Pain flared through my leg, hot and immediate, the pressure tightening like a rusted bear trap. Keaton laughed. The sound curdled the air, high-pitched and jagged, warbling between something human and something that had never been. His entire body quivered with the force of it, his grotesquely long neck arching like a bridge, vertebrae rippling beneath stretched, paper-thin skin. The ridges of his spine pressed outward, shifting unnaturally, jutting like knuckles ready to crack. I swung the shovel down on Mutt's head, the impact shuddering through my arms. His jaws only clamped tighter, and I felt a fresh rush of warmth as blood trickled into my boot. Gritting my teeth, I pried at the head like opening a clamshell, peeling it from my leg. It took a strip of fabric and flesh with it as it crashed to the floor. Snarling, I wedged the shovel between its upper and lower jaw, pressing down with my full weight. Bone splintered, the jaw cracking apart with a sickening pop as the lower half disconnected completely. Keaton howled with laughter. It was a riot to him. He shook with it, body convulsing, that awful neck writhing like a snake. I swung the shovel sideways, aiming straight for his grinning face, but before it could land, his neck snapped back, recoiling too fast, retreating into the night. The shovel flew from my hands, clattering against the wall with a metallic clang. He lingered in the window, looming, watching, waiting. Shouldn't have killed it. You started something you can't finish, little miss. Should have let it feed until it was done. Then I'd have picked it up. His voice rasped like a snake's hiss, slithering into the space between us. His head retracted, impossibly smooth, that too long neck drawing back into the night. His hand peeled from the windowsill, talons scraping against the concrete, leaving behind deep gouges in the stone. Behind me, the thrashing body stilled. Silence settled, thick and suffocating. I didn't dare turn around, not yet. I braced myself, waiting for the inevitable, for Keaton to slip back in through some unseen opening, to drive those jagged fingernails into my spine, to tear into me with his yellowed, animalistic teeth. But nothing came. My breath left me in a shudder. My body screamed for me to move, but the lingering presence of him made my muscles coil tight, every nerve waiting for the strike that never landed. Finally, I forced myself to turn. Mutt's body lay still. Whatever had been animating it, twisting it into something beyond death, was gone now. For good, I hoped. I limped toward the nearest cremation retort, my leg throbbing with every step. My hands trembled as I fidgeted with the loading door. It clunked open, the hinges groaning, and I slid the roller tray out. Mutt's head went in first, his detached lower jaw following. His body came next, heavier than it should have been, dead weight sinking into the metal. The pain in my leg flared, sending hot sparks of agony shooting up my thigh, but I bit down against the pain and shoved him all the way inside. Fumbling with the control panel, I pressed the buttons, praying I got the right sequence. The burners roared to life, the chamber flickering with searing orange light. Heat pulsed outward, warming my skin as the fire licked at the corpse. I staggered away, limbs shaking, and made my way to the office break room. The drawers rattled as I tore them open, my hands shaking too much to be precise. Gauze, scissors, bandages. I grabbed everything I could, then hobbled back to the retort. Collapsing beside it, I pried off my boot, wincing as blood dribbled onto the floor. The sock beneath was soaked, the fabric clinging to my skin. I exhaled deeply, then reached for the scissors, snipping my pant leg above the wound before peeling it away. The damage was worse than I thought. Blood pooled in the puncture wounds, the torn flesh already darkening with bruises that spread outward like shock waves from each ragged tear. My calf throbbed in time with my pulse, sharp bursts of pain radiating up my leg. The bites might have been deep enough for stitches, but I didn't have time for that. The jeans had saved me from the worst of it, though the shredded fabric clung to my skin, soaked through. I pressed gauze against the wounds, wincing as fresh blood welled against the white cotton. I wrapped a compression bandage around my leg, tight enough to slow the bleeding but not enough to cut circulation. Antibiotics or lidocaine would have been a blessing. I could have stitched it myself if I had to, but a crematorium didn't exactly keep medical supplies on hand. I leaned my head back against the wall, exhaling through clenched teeth. My ears rang from the heat, the exhaustion, the pain, and then I heard it, a scream, distant, warped, twisting through the air like the high-pitched wail of logs splitting in a fire. I turned toward the retort viewing window. Inside, Mutt's body writhed as the flames engulfed him. The hairs curled first, blackening before catching fire, the flesh peeling away in layers. His limbs twitched, shuddering, the last vestiges of unnatural life refusing to die easily. The stench of burning fur and charred meat turned my stomach. I forced myself to watch as the thing that had haunted me was reduced to nothing more than a skeletal frame. Eventually, there was nothing left but black soot clinging to the glass. The steady hum of the cremation unit filled the room. I let the heat seep into my bones before finally pushing myself upright, limping toward the control panel to shut everything down. By the time the retort had cooled enough to retrieve the remains, the sun was sinking below the horizon, the sky smeared with a hue like burnt orange. Keaton hadn't come back, yet. I grabbed a shovel and a garbage bag. The retort door groaned open, and I scooped out the calcined bones, brushing away the brittle black remnants until all that remained was pale dust. One by one, I fed the remains into the cremulator. The machine whirred, grinding the fragments down until every last piece of mutt fit into a bag just slightly larger than my hand. I stood there for a long time, gripping the bag in my blood-stained hands. Keaton had slunk away into the night, but I knew this wasn't over. I thought about Ryan, Angie, the dogs, my clinic reduced to nothing but cinders and ruin. I'd lost so much in just a few weeks. Too much. Half my life was gone in an instant. I felt too hollowed out to even cry. Ripped out of my life in an instant. No rhyme or reason to it. He could have killed me, easily. He was toying with me, like a cat slapping around a finch with a broken wing, each swipe landing harder than the last. Soon, I reckoned he'd start biting. I gritted through the pain as I pushed the freezer back into place, the weight of it straining against my injured leg. Plugging it back in, I reloaded it with black body bags, setting the torn-off lid back on top like a makeshift seal. The air reeked of blood and freezer burn, and of the dust blowing in from outside. I found a broom and a mop, doing what I could to clean up my blood, and mutts, which had thawed into a dark, congealing slick on the floor. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Stepping outside, I checked both ways. Nothing but dirt and desert weeds stretching into the distance. The silence out here wasn't comforting. It was heavy, pressing down, like a held breath. The dread never left. Sliding into my car, I turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, a sound that grounded me, if only for a moment. I set Mutt's bag of ashes on the passenger seat, staring at it like it might start moving again. Then I saw something in the footwell, something round, hollow sockets where fingers had pressed deep and firm. Dr. Harkham's head, a parting gift. Bile rose in my throat, but I swallowed it back, forcing my breathing steady. I'd had a tough life growing up. I knew how to push things down, bury them deep. I grabbed an old jacket from the back seat and tossed it over the round heap. At least I didn't have to look at him like that anymore. Then I did the only thing I could do. I called the one person who might be able to do something about this. The only one who might be able to pull me from the riptide I was drowning in. Joe, my buddy from high school. I hadn't talked to him in years, but I'd missed his call this morning. That had to mean something. The dirt road stretched toward the main highway as I drove, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than they needed to. He picked up on the second ring. Allison, thank God. Tears welled at the corners of my eyes. God, Joe, it's been so long. I saw the news. I know you worked there. I had to see if you were okay. Joe, I need to talk to you. Something's after me. It's been after me since I first saw it a few weeks ago. I need your help. A dog came into my clinic. Bad fucking luck. Thing turned the building into a slaughterhouse without so much as a blink. Silence. The joy in his voice faded, melted away like chocolate left too long in the sun. Outside, the sky burned with the last light of day, the sun dipping toward the edge of the world, flaring one final orange goodbye. That's not just bad luck, Allison. That's something else. Something old. That's bad medicine. Joe clicked his tongue, the same way he used to. The sound hit something deep in my chest, a crack in my ribs I hadn't noticed forming until now. I should have called him sooner. Maybe things would have turned out differently. Maybe not. You got my address? Come down to the res. I'll make sure they let you in. His voice was steady, familiar, safe. He gave me directions. The Navajo reservation a couple hours to the southwest. I've got some ashes too, I said. My fingers tightened around the small bag beside me. I cremated his dog, the one he brought into my clinic before all this shit went south. Joe went quiet for a moment, then softer this time. Not a dog. He didn't elaborate. Not anymore. A sharp, blistering pain grabbed my calf. I sucked in a breath, my legs shivering, nerves screaming as if a white-hot blade had been pressed into my skin. I yelped. Allison? Joe's voice sharpened. The pain spread like fire, radiating from the bite wound, sinking deep. My pulse hammered as I clutched my leg, fingers pressing into the fabric of my jeans, but nothing stopped the burning. Then, from the darkness of the footwell, something shifted. A wet, gurgling croak, a jaw working. I froze. Joe must have heard it too. His breath hitched, sharp over the line. A slithering rasp clawed up from beneath the jacket I'd tossed over the thing in the footwell. The sound of dry lips parting, of a raspy voice speaking through a mouth that shouldn't be able to talk anymore. His voice. Allison. My breath stilled inside me. A hollow, empty space opened in my chest. Keaton. He was talking through lips that didn't belong to him. Lips that once belonged to Dr. Harkham. The weight of his amusement pressed down on me, thick and choking. A grin curled in the dark, unseen but felt. The voice slithered through, dripping with something close to excitement beneath the folds of my jacket on the floor. Slightly muffled, but clear enough to hear. I'm really starting to enjoy this game.